Great, thank you. Welcome, everyone. This is the Legislative Joint Rules Committee. It is Friday, October 8th. Today on the agenda, we'll be tackling two topics. One, starting to do our work to prepare us for the developing guidance for video conferencing, live streaming, session and committee meeting recordings. So we'll begin there. And then after that, we'll have a conversation about legislative space issues and how we can start and we'll continue the work to prepare this building for January. After we do have some larger decisions to make about how we're back, but there are some easier decisions that we can make now to give staff guidance on. So with that, why don't we start with the conversation around video conference and live streaming. We are going to start hearing from staff today to help give us some more information so that we can start drafting something to get more feedback on. So with that, Michael Grady, you come on up. Good morning.
Good morning. Grady with Ledge Council. So I believe you were all given a copy of the Legislative Advisory Committee on the State House's report. And one of the recommendations in that report is that video conferencing and the live streaming tools used by standing committees during the 2021 legislative session should continue to be available for use by standing committees and by staff. And I emphasize staff because, as you all know, many of our staff have children under 12. Vaccination is not available for children under 12, and there's multiple instances of contact tracing where our staff are either required to stay home with their children who are quarantined or whom are being quarantined themselves because they were identified as part of the contact tracing. So the staff really valued the live streaming and remote computers that were available last year because it did help them balance that work-life nature of life that is today. And they would like to have those tools available to them going into the next session, especially if there's no vaccination for kids under 12 and contact tracing and similar protocols continue. In addition, I think you probably all, for better or worse, realized that the public was participating a lot more.
It's for better. It's for better. It's for better.
Through the remote tools. And I think that that's something that the committees of jurisdiction for the use of these tools need to consider as well. And what the advisory committee recognized is that they were not the ones with the jurisdiction over whether or not to use the remote live streaming tools, et cetera, or not. They believed it was either a decision for you or more specifically for the individual rules committees of each chamber, because the Joint Rules Committee doesn't dictate how the Senate chamber is going to work and vice versa for the House chamber, et cetera. So some of the decisions, the issues need to be addressed by you and by the individual rules committees for how to go forward with the use of these tools. But if you do go forward with the use of these tools, there are a lot of questions about how or if or what you use. For example, YouTube was the primary tool used to broadcast and record the committee hearings and other live stream events. Is that the best tool? It becomes available to everyone in the public. People can take those recordings and manipulate them. We have a couple of examples of how that was done. I wish Tucker was here because Tucker, he testified in I believe it was House Gov Ops about a charter change, and they they took his recording and they started calling him Legal Tucker. And then he had his own web page called Legal Tucker. And it was it was a little bit funny, but a little bit inappropriate as well. And it puts everyone that is testifying kind of on a different level of, oh, now everything I'm saying is going to be recorded and potentially manipulated. So that leads to the question of, is YouTube the best tool? If you are going to record, I think that's kind of the first step of these rules committees. Are you going to record? Is there a way to just live stream it out so it doesn't record? And so those are some of the questions that I think the rules committees need to look at. Then there's the public records aspect of these. Prior to this past session, the committee meetings were recorded generally at the discretion of the chair. There's not a mandate, but it was in the House, it's a recommended practice. Some committees still don't record fully, and that's the discretion of the chair. But when those committees did record, those recordings were sent to archives for archival purposes. What do you do with video recordings on YouTube? Is it just becoming archival because it's there?
Mm-hmm.
IT does have the ability to edit and manipulate and even remove a video from YouTube. But then does it have to go to archives? I don't know. These are kind of difficult questions of how do you balance the public nature, the archival nature, the import of these records for legislative intent, if there is any import of them for legislative intent. So that's a really, it's an interesting question. Will you just destroy them after a certain time? You know, that there are recordings from the early 70s at archives. And I'll use an example. One of Secretary Bloomer's relatives was very involved in the open meeting law and the Public Records Act. There's recordings and transcripts from those committee meetings that are very, very helpful to interpretation of the Public Records Act and the meeting law. I don't know if you want to maintain these types of records for that type of use in the future, or because of the kind of imaging nature of them, you think that they should be temporary in nature and then somehow managed later in life. So these are all kind of, they're somewhat difficult questions, but I think that they're also questions that you're going to be faced with, especially from some of the advocates who are very involved in these issues and very self-interested in how these records are managed.
Sen Ballant. Before we move on, can you just let us know, so right now, all the work that we did last legislative session, that was then, it was streamed over YouTube, it was saved, it's now currently on YouTube. Is there any sort of archival step that we've taken at this point? If you could just bring us, just what is the status quo right now?
So the only thing I know is Greg is going to turn to him.
Great.
He's the one that.
And we can do it in a different order if you'd like, Madam Chair. I just want to make sure we have an understanding of what's happening right now.
I'm happy to chime in if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead.
You need to, sadly, having done this in this committee, you have to come up because the microphone will, please, yeah, sorry.
Sorry. Morning, Kevin.
Good morning.
Hi.
For the record, Kevin Moore, Director of IT. I was trying to note down all the questions that were popping up, so I have ready answers. As far as the current question, what are the archival steps we've taken so far? We are working with VSERA, Vermont State Archives and Records Administration, at this point in order to transfer that content over to them. Absent some other direction, that is the recording of our remote sessions. We don't have what we're most familiar with, which are the Tascam audio recordings available, because it wasn't physically possible to use that technology at that point. We made a handful of attempts to download content from the YouTube network. Earlier on this summer, ran into some bandwidth issues on our primary ISP, so we have altered that connection. It should be actually ready this time next week for us to continue on that project and deliver that content over to the VSERA, State Archives Records Administration. So that's where we are currently with it.
And do we pay from the legislative branch to assist VSERA in that? Who's dealing with the cost of that?
So the cost is actually, it's staff time,
Right.
but it's staff time that we've typically incurred at the end of a biennium. And we usually do that with the paper records in collaboration with Ledge Council and operations. And then we take the digital content off the website, off copy of it, off the General Assembly's website, and add that to the package going over to VSERA. So it's a different process. It's a little more time consuming because it's different. It's newer to us, but we'll improve that as time goes on, depending on which content delivery network we ultimately decide to use.
Senator Clarkson?
So Kevin, the cost going forward though would be far more substantial, my understanding is, because these digital records, these video recordings take up a huge amount of space in the cloud. I mean, this is tens of thousands of hours of committee time. And that cost is not only if you're concerned about global warming, that's got big impact. And second, it will be a cost to store that in the cloud, is my understanding.
So in the future, yes. At current, one of the benefits about using the YouTube platform is that it's a no cost to us at this point. It's a benefit. It's one of the pros and cons, and a long list of pros and cons. It was certainly the right tool at the time because it allowed us to pivot rather quickly. We don't have the capacity to move to a new content delivery system before session of 22, this upcoming one. But I do recommend that we put an RFP out at some point to figure out what permanent content delivery system we want to have here. The pros and cons of each platform, what the costs are recurring in one time. Obviously, there's going to be some capital expense of going through and acquiring that technology, wherever that shall be. And then there's an operational expense attached to it too, depending on how much we are storing, archiving, and maintaining. Depending on some decisions yet to be made, do we just live stream and not archive? And then we use a different archival process similar. So let's say we're all still in person like we are now. There's no reason we couldn't put the Tascam in front of us and record that. That's a cost and a storage calculation we already have. And we could still live stream, but maybe not archive. There's a bunch of different ways that we can go around and figure out how we want to operate. And all of those do have budgetary impacts, and they do have operational impacts.
Thank you. Any other questions before we continue to hear from Mike? Go ahead.
Yeah, just to be clear, so prior to COVID, we had that Star Trek-y thing sitting on the table and people would call in from that and they would be recorded. And I know that I got CDs at the time and then flash drives or getting it to hear the committee meetings. So you're saying that we could still do that, have a live stream and then have that as that piece, the audio portion be the archival piece, and then the live stream, say it's there for 30 days and then it goes away. Or at the end of the session, they all get.
So could we hit that target? Yes, we could hit that target. We just have to check on a couple of nuances. There's always some nuances here. The Tascam, that little digital recorder that we're familiar with, replaced the CD recorders that we had, oh goodness, probably going on 6-8 years ago now. And they have incredible microphones. So if we have video conference or pod phones, conference calls happening in the room, it should capture all of that with the same level of intelligibility that we had previously when we were all physically present. Obviously, it's a different record. It's audio only at that point when we're storing it, but it takes up far less space as far as storage and archive goes. I think it's a policy decision primarily. We can certainly wrap the technology around whatever the policy turns into.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Senator Brock.
If YouTube is the media that we continue to use, or the product that we continue to use, is there any limit based on at least their current policies as to how long this information is retained?
Not to my knowledge. We have dug pretty deep into a handful of the end user license agreements that they have. I have not come across that yet. One of the things that YouTube really likes to do is to hang on to everything forever. It allows them to, get a lot more traffic.
Yeah.
And they make their money off of ad content that we don't control. And that's one of the downsides from my perspective of using the YouTube platform. The upside being is you can't buy a digital device this day and age that doesn't have some access to YouTube.
Right.
So there are pros and cons there. There are several devices. If you think like a Roku TV stick, that comes with YouTube capabilities, but not a web browser. So if we made the decision to move our content delivery to something that required a web browser, maybe it doesn't work for some people. And so that's just a decision that we have to make very carefully and make sure that we understand what those implications are.
Yes. Senator Clarkson.
So the ongoing concern about the Tucker example, the ongoing concern of how, and we'll go through an election cycle next year where we will see how the content of all of our performances in committee are used in campaigns, which is not going to be pretty, I'm sure. So that concern of how it can be misused will not go away if we don't do YouTube, if we don't save it, because the minute you're live streaming, someone else can be recording it.
That's correct. So,
Yeah,
if you're putting digital video content on the internet, regardless of where you're putting it, it can be captured, manipulated, and used in a way that you don't want it to be.
Right.
However, if you have an authoritative copy available at any given point, that's how we make sure that we combat that manipulation.
right. So just to follow up the pluses, we can go through and find out, I believe, in every one of these, our committee hearings during the course of the last session, how many of the public were present at those committees. So the trade-off is 245 people watching a Senate Economic Development meeting versus the 10 that would be in the room normally. What's the trade-off with our exposure of faux pas or whatever happens to it? I mean, so but it's a balancing act that we have to figure out, that access versus, right. Yeah.
For context, I'm just pulling up some statistics I have in front of me. Since we started streaming on YouTube, we have over 415,000 views of the content that's available on YouTube. So it's a substantial amount of interaction with the
Talk a lot.
content that we have.
You guys talk.
We're looking at over 7,000 hours of content as well.
Right.
Go ahead.
The vast majority of those views were not live, right? They were way after.
I'd have to go and look at that. There are, depending on the situation. So for example, the pension task force public hearings. This is actually when House government operations was still going on. So those public hearings with the pension debate, we had over 1,000 concurrent live viewers on that stream at any given point.
Right.
I think, unless I'm missing a newer one, I think that's the highest concurrent live viewers we've had at any given point. And that's something we certainly couldn't have fit into the well of the House.
Right.
I guess what I just wanted to sort of throw out there was that we're hearing from a lot of our colleagues how they really appreciated the ability to go back after a meeting while they were in a meeting and see what happened in another committee, especially the ability to stream it at 1.5 or 2 times
Speed, yes.
speed.
The other big benefit, so we have 2 different transcription tools, one of which I don't much care for, but we're using it. That's the live transcription tool. Then we have the post-live transcription tool, which is quite a bit more accurate. And that's been an incredibly valuable tool. I've heard a lot of feedback from, both from media partners, public, legislators as well, going through and actually capturing some text to do a search, rather than trying to find in an audio file or a video file where that information was being discussed.
Council. Go ahead. If I could just go back for a moment to what you were saying, Mike, about the impact on the staff, because we are public figures. We are in the media eye already, as uncomfortable as it can be for any faux pas to be replayed over and over. I'm wondering, do we have other examples of lawyers or assistants, people who felt like their role, which is usually behind the scenes, was elevated in a way publicly that was not, it's not part of their job description to be a public figure in that way. I'm just wondering, was the situation with that one lawyer you mentioned earlier an outlier, or do we have other examples of that?
So I have there's one specific inappropriate use and then kind of a broad category of issues. The one other specific, one of our female attorneys, her testimony and her image from YouTube was used on, I'm not sure what platform.
Social media.
Social media as one of the, I'll just say the most attractive women in government. But it wasn't used, it was a more demeaning category for that. And so she was pretty, she was I think she was a little scared,
Yep.
a little offended,
Of course.
embarrassed, etc.
Okay.
So that's the specific example. The kind of broader category, and I think we've all seen it, is that our testimony is now kind of being broken down kind of into microscopically. People will have the opportunity to stop and analyze everything we say. And a couple of people wrote op-eds about it and kind of breaking down, it's a great tool to bring more people in to participate in the process, but it gives them the opportunity to very closely inspect everything that is said in the committee during the process.
Yeah.
That's where I think it's most affected us, but frankly, especially the people who've been here a while get numb to that. I'm more concerned about the offensive use of a person's image.
Absolutely.
The ridicule of a person who's
Just trying to do their
doing
job,
his job.
right? Yeah.
He gets excited about things like charter changes and you probably want that kind of.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, right.
investment. You don't want to be ridiculed for that.
And what we don't want is for lawyers to not feel like they can speak freely about the work ahead of them. That is what is concerning to me.
Critically important.
Yeah.
I would have witnesses
Go
as
ahead.
well. Witnesses as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, totally. All right. So I want to make sure we give you more, if you had other comments that you wanted to make or flags for us to be thinking about.
Yeah, the other thing to think about is if you are allowing remote participation, what do you use for remote participation? Who do you allow to remotely participate? Who makes that decision? Does a person, a witness that is allowed to remotely testify, do they get to stay on the Zoom and be on the Zoom for the rest of the committee hearing? I've seen that work out really well. People have been very respectful most of the time, but sometimes the person that was allowed in to testify then becomes a little bit disruptive. And how would you manage that? And who's going to manage that?
Right.
Some of that your chairs have already managed. figured out a way that they're going to deal with that. But do the rules committees want to develop protocol or process? And it doesn't necessarily need to be very detailed. It could just be that the chair's control who participates and when and if they're asked to be removed from that. You don't have necessarily need to be very detailed.
Yep. I know. We will definitely be seeking input from our chairs because I know everyone has their different style and how they operate. So we want to make sure that we have space for them to be able to do that too.
And that, I think I hit all 5 points and not necessarily in order, but
That's helpful. Thank you. Thank you. Since you're here, does that work for you, Kevin?
Sure.
Okay, great.
I'm not sure what specific questions you'd like me to answer or what you'd like me to start with. Discuss any particular point in detail. I'll just kind of give a brief overview of where we are.
That would be great.
So we're largely where we were as far as live streaming. We are still using the Zoom platform primarily for video conferencing. There are a lot of pros and cons to each platform, and the selection of the Zoom platform was very intentional because it met the most of our requirements early on. There are many other providers out there for video conferencing, and I'm happy to discuss the merits of each to the knowledge I have at any given point, and conduct research as necessary if I don't have that answer for you. Live streaming is probably the most challenging part of the mix, though, to really wrap our heads around. And it's more from the number of content creators that we have. So we use the term content creator, but it's your committee assistants. We're asking the committee assistants to do another job in addition to the work that they already have. And so using our existing video conference platform to enable live streaming, to kick it over to YouTube, to make these types of setups 1 or 2 buttons for the committee assistant, and then it's pretty passive beyond that, has really enabled this to happen, especially in a remote posture. As we come back into the building, though, we probably want to see things a little bit more integrated, a little more streamlined. We have some temporary setups here, but that's precisely what they are. They're temporary. They're not integrated into the building. We haven't thought through every single component because we haven't had the time, nor have we taken the proper time to plan it appropriately. And so we want to continue to professionalize it. We want to make sure we're moving in a direction that the General Assembly as a whole wants to move, that we're not making any additional assumptions as we have over the last year plus now. And it comes down to a couple pieces for us. What's the desire to continue live streaming or video conferencing? If we do have that continued desire to live stream video conference, is it across every single meeting that we have? Is it just a certain subset of meetings? What are we archiving? That's a huge question for us because we have to scale our systems accordingly. Where does the original content live? Does it live somewhere on a cloud environment? Does it live here? There are some strong feelings depending on who you talk to about where that content lives. And how do we deliver it to people? YouTube, as I mentioned a moment ago, is an incredibly effective tool, but it's not necessarily, in my opinion, the most appropriate tool. I'd like to see something a little more professional, a little more integrated into our website, but also has the flexibility to be leveraged on YouTube if that's the direction that we're moving.
Can you say a little bit more about that? Can be leveraged on YouTube?
So depending on how you stream content and what tools you use to enable that stream, you can actually stream to multiple different platforms concurrently. So, the YouTuber community is really, kind of a good example here. These people that are professional streamers, they'll have an individual tool that'll stream to Facebook Live, it'll stream to YouTube, it'll stream to Twitch, it'll stream to a bunch of different platforms simultaneously with very little interaction. And you hit a larger audience by doing it that way. Is that appropriate in this case? I think that's really an operational decision. That's a policy level decision. Where do we want to stream? Do we want to have a single point of access? Maybe that's the most appropriate path forward. You have to come to our website. You have to go to the committee page, and you have to take those active steps in order to get to that content. That could very likely reduce the amount of manipulation that we see of these videos out there, but it's certainly not going to get rid of it. If somebody is intent on going through and manipulating something that is online, they're going to find a way to do so. It's that authoritative copy we have to be aware of.
Go ahead.
Just following on that, does that allow those folks that you said are professional live streamers to stream immediately after or something like that from a controlled legislative?
I don't know if I'm fully understanding your question.
I'm just wondering about, you said they can manipulate it. Can they also just completely put it out on their own?
Yeah, so there are so many free tools out there online where you can do a screen capture and you can just take that and download it, save it to your own device, and then repurpose it elsewhere. There's very little control once you open it up to public consumption.
So I'm less worried in this case about manipulation, but access. So it doesn't prevent anybody from saying, this is important to me, and here's the.
I don't think so. I don't think you will always be able to share the content somehow. So for example, if it's embedded into our own website, you can do it a couple different ways. You can just share the link to the web page on social media is, usually the most common platform for citizen engagement.
Yeah.
Or you could turn around and you could have maybe an embedded YouTube feed. There are a variety of different ways that we can approach it to make sure that the content's available for people to share appropriately as we want them to be able to do.
Okay.
But hopefully that answers.
Yeah, that answered it, yes.
I wanted to.
Go ahead, Senator Clarkson.
So I'm just curious because Congress has been doing this, the feds have been doing this for a while. And what can we learn from them without reinventing the wheel? And so I'm just curious where the feds have landed on this and can we use that, their experience in a useful way? Yes, but particularly with the archiving, with the portal entry. I mean, I don't know if you had to go through a single portal. You sort of have to do that now to get into watching the committee meeting. You have to go to our committee webpage and go, that's to me a single portal. Sort of.
I mean, you could certainly use YouTube as a way to get there. You can mark the YouTube channels. There's a variety of different ways you can get there. You can use some of the embedded tools available from YouTube to notify you when something is popping up that's new content or new live streaming content. So it's not perfect single serial path, if you will, to get to that information. Now, it's a logical path. If you're new to the process and you aren't familiar with how to access the live stream, absolutely, somebody's going to come to our website, go through the page and find the stream that way. If you're a lobbyist or somebody who makes the money based off of this building and how they interact with it, they probably have shortcutted that money now.
But Congress.
So I would encourage you all at some point to look at live.house.gov.
Yes.
And this is actually something I've used as a model in previous testimony with the Legislative Advisory Committee on the State House. Hopefully I didn't butcher the name.
You're good.
And this is really a direction I would see us going, is moving in this type of direction. And it's what I would call an e-government platform. And so it's much more than just a live stream video. It's integrating your data points. All your database information is readily integrated and accessible to the public. You're integrating your agendas. Anything that changes live throughout the process, you rearrange your agenda, you have a new witness. All of that appears immediately in front of you. Upcoming schedules, actions, roll call votes, all of that stuff can be put into this type of platform. It's a really comprehensive style solution. And then you have the archiving and ease of navigation. So, for example, it's really hard to see. I'm going to try to show it to you, but I encourage you all to take some time to look at it.
You can send out the link after.
Yes, okay. At the top of the screen, it's just a simple little date.
Yeah.
And all you do is you hit the arrow left or right and it brings you to previous dates, or it opens a calendar. It really helps you navigate quite easily. And it's all in, it's a terrible phrase, but it's a single pane of glass. It's one pane. You get to see everything going on in front of you. You can manipulate the size of them, so it's a little easier for you to use it. So it's an incredibly flexible, scalable platform that provides all of the relevant information in one single location. It's quite nice. It's also quite expensive. It's not an inexpensive solution. I would say you're solidly in the seven figures for such an investment. Probably looking, I'm just trying to pull back into the archives here. Last time we explored it, we were looking in the neighborhood of 2 to 4 million, if I remember correctly, to outfit the General Assembly.
And what to maintain it?
Usually you're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15% annually. So if we're at 4 million, what's that? 400,000 to.
Yeah, so much less to maintain it, but buying in.
Maintain typically. There are a lot of pieces and parts here. There's a lot of server infrastructure. There's a lot of camera infrastructure. There's a lot of microphone infrastructure. So there's a ton of information and a lot of components you have to put together to make sure it works seamlessly.
Sorry, I just have a follow up on this question. So it strikes me that this might be ARPA funding applicable. I mean, it might be making government, as a result of COVID, making government accessible to its people.
So I'm not going to try to be a lawyer on this. I think that's a possibility.
Right.
I'll certainly defer to the attorneys in the room.
So that would be one question is this, and Catherine is not here, but that we can ask. So if it was ARPA funded, we would just be looking at the sustainable cost going forward. But it is, and serving on the Legislative Advisory Committee on the State House, it would be good to know just so that we could build it into the renovations that are, we hope, coming down the pipe. So to me, this would be an interesting way to go. And the question is,
it certainly could be. I would expect a 2+ year process to get to something like that. There's a lot of design and engineering. There's a lot of scope analysis to be done. There's a lot of work to be done there. And we'd have to bring in multiple third-party contractors and partners to pull it off.
but that would sync with our expansion project.
Yeah. I have one quick follow-up and then I'll turn it over to Senator Ballant. Is there through council, state governments or NCSL resources or supports available to see how other states are tackling this? Are there any way that we can share different systems or anything so we're not reinventing? Yeah.
Through National Association of Legislative Information Technology, which is a subgroup of NCSL, we have many of these conversations routinely. And there are as many diverse opinions on how best to approach it. Some of the bigger states, California, Texas, they have completely automated camera systems. They have in every room, they have completely automated database systems that provide such style content. And then you get to some of the mid-sized states and they have a mixture between homegrown solutions that work well for them, or they go out to third parties that are routinely make themselves available to the NCSL seminars and such. I am confident we would have several vendors responding to an RFP. If we put something like this out, we would have no less than 3 immediately coming to mind. So this is a maturing industry, and we would probably compare to some large city governments that have already experienced this and these challenges.
Madam Speaker, you asked my question.
Great.
Gosh, you two must work together.
Any other questions on this before we move on?
Thank you.
All right. Do we have Tucker Anderson available or should we move on?
Area.
Wow, that's lovely. Thank you. Hello, Tucker. Can you hear us?
Good morning, everyone. Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
You could be a little louder.
I'll move my laptop a little closer for you, Senator Clarkson. Is that better?
Yeah, yeah, good, thanks.
Excellent. Well, good morning. Michael Grady covered a lot of the material that I would have covered from a records officer perspective about the maintenance and preservation of your legislative records, specifically the live streaming records. So I'll just touch upon a few particular issues that I have been thinking about since you all started taking this on. I'll start with committee records. An initial question, what will the format of official records for the committees be moving forward? These are questions that should likely be posed to the chairs of the individual committees. But to break that down a little bit, the question is, are the recordings of the live streams going to be the official records that are available to the public upon request? Or is there going to be some other format that is preserved, potentially in perpetuity, for those requests? And within that, what is the content of those records? And the reason I ask that is that the live stream recording is going to, of course, capture everything that happens while the record button is on. And I'm sure that you can all think of a few instances where non-legislative business was entered into a live stream record and later had to be dealt with. Next question, how long do we retain the live stream records, either on YouTube or in the archives? And just to let you know, these are all questions that come up in a records maintenance plan or a records maintenance schedule. And for the committees, this is something that the chairs would have to think about. Following up on that, should records be permanently archived, these live stream records? And can the publication of the records through the live stream be controlled? And that latter question, there are a few potentially problematic things for you to think about moving forward with the live streams. The first, which you've already discussed, is simultaneous data scraping of these videos. So, for example, legal databases simultaneously recording and preserving the committee testimony and committee action, and then potentially selling the recordings moving forward or just making them available to legal researchers and the public. And it touches upon a broader issue of how are these live stream recordings going to affect legislative interpretation, which is something that a lot of legislative records management schedules attempt to deal with. The second new age issue to think about with the question of how do you control the publication of official legislative records is whether using a platform like YouTube would allow a person, one individual, to drive attention towards certain legislative action and have undue influence. And I'm thinking specifically the use of bots and bot technology to drive attention to a particular clip of a legislator or to a particular legislative recording. So those are the committee questions. The chambers potentially have a few different issues that you should consider moving forward. The first, how long are you going to retain recordings of the chambers and the votes that take place within the chambers? Second question, what do you show in recordings of the chambers? And this is potentially important for a few different issues. First, if you're going to be showing potentially the voice votes of individual legislators in the House, in the Senate, does this alienate particular members who can be seen with their voice votes on the floor? So if there are certain members that you can see their votes and others that you can't, does that have a disproportionate impact on those legislators? The second, and this is just a soft thought on my part, I have not fleshed this out fully, does this comport with the demands of the Vermont Constitution with keeping official records, specifically the official journal of both chambers? There is a section of the Vermont Constitution that requires that individual legislators, when their votes are recorded in the journal, have an opportunity to explain their votes. And finally, if this does comport with the legal demands of the Vermont Constitution, does showing the voice votes of individual legislators comport with the spirit of the Constitution? And what I'm thinking of there is specifically, does this allow individual legislators to potentially impact the interpretation of legislation in an undue manner. So does the debate or comments of individual members that would typically not be entered in the journal, but is now being published as an official record of the General Assembly in these videos, allow those legislators who choose to comment or speak during debate to influence the later interpretation of that legislation? Something for you all to think about. Those are the initial thoughts that I had. If you have any questions for me, be happy to respond to them.
Thank you. We'll open it up for questions. Looking around the table, any questions for Tucker? All right, thank you very much, Tucker. All right, now why don't we go to Secretary Bloomer. Good morning.
I'm going to answer your questions or give you some thoughts and then take questions, or how would you like it?
I would love to hear your thoughts, and then we'll open up for questions.
So I guess there are two or three things. Most importantly is I think you've heard that each of the rules committees will need to determine what occurs within their chamber and both also within their committees. That will take some rule changes, at least through the Senate. In the past, we have not allowed recordings live. We've not allowed a lot of things that have happened in the last couple of years. We were able to do that, and I think the House is similar. I'm not quite as familiar, but we were able to do that because of the temporary rule, which allowed the Rules Committee to set the parameters. But that going forward will need to be addressed in both chambers, and it may be time to kind of look at formalizing what happens in committees anyways, but it has been as testified that it's usually a chair's discretion, but that needs to have some thought put into it. And from a staff perspective for you all on that is the sooner the better. I mean, I was going to give you as a rep, the director of IT has done a very good job of helping to build in flexibility. We went through, like in the Senate chamber yesterday, we have a lot of options that the Senate can decide, and you in the House will also. But the sooner we have some direction on what you're planning to do, the easier it will be. The flexibility has been built in, so we could go back as just recording our sessions, which we've done. We have some cameras that work through, where you want it to go and how you want it to go is my thought is the sooner you make some of those decisions, the better your product will be. If you do that or try to do that at the beginning of January, it's just not going to be up to snuff, at least. And the nice thing about most of your staff in this building, they really are professionals. They want to keep you good product.
Yeah.
And we were very lucky, I think, through starting 2 Aprils ago and working forward, that the product was much better than, a lot better than the worst case scenario you could have seen, whether it be committees or in the chamber. So the sooner those decisions are made, the better. I will say, without getting into too much detail, there's both pros and cons to opening this all up and making it. There are improvements, but there are going to be some drawbacks you're going to find in the line with sitting where I sit. The debate's different. Participation is different. I think you're going to get different types of legislators, just those who are much more media savvy and are much more, doesn't mean they're going to be better or worse legislators, but there will be a change, and you are balancing or making that decision on how much you're going to put out there and what's going to happen in front of those cameras. And it is one of the benefits of the Vermont legislature is you've always been a citizens legislature, and which means anybody can come in. But I may be wrong, and I hope I am, because I believe you'll really will open it up. But I believe, will potentially have some people not run because of some of the issues of how much they're going to be on air all the time. And if you do open it up, which I just hope that's not correct. I hope I'm wrong on that. So let me briefly talk a little bit about some of Tucker's issues. So one of the changes I've seen is, you may not have thought about it, but when you're all live, there's absolutely no reason to do a division. Okay, the House is a little bit different than the Senate. You were doing it last year on YouTube and on Zoom, but we had the 30 senators on. And when you come back here, when you do a division, there's gonna be cameras all over the place. And so there is absolutely really, the numbers are gonna be showing who's standing and who's not standing on a division. Similarly with a roll call, sorry, with a voice vote, there, we had in the Senate, all 30 screens. I know that some in the House, they flash up depending on who was saying and what was being said. But you're gonna be having everybody know really how everyone's voting all the time. And now that's maybe good and it may be bad, but there are both pros and cons to it. And you'll have to try to address how much you want seen. One of Tucker's sort of comments triggered in me. We can turn the cameras off when people vote, but I'm not sure that's going to be helpful on the PR side of it.
Sure.
We can adjust however you decide to do it, but I'm not sure it's going to solve the issue. I'm a little less worried in the Senate on the explanation of the vote. And the reason for that is in the Senate side, any one senator can request a roll call. So if a senator really wants to be on the record and have an explanation, they just ask for a roll call. And given that the videos are going to be live and everybody voting, it's not, you're not keeping any, people are going to be able to read your lips. The way that we're currently looking at it, all 30 will be on the screen all the time. It's the way unless we're told differently, that's our flexibility. And so they can always ask in the Senate. The House is a little bit different. You have to be sustained. And that's something that the House will have to look at if they're going to address what Tucker's issue was. But from the Senate's perspective, I believe a senator can still always put their comments or their explanation by just asking a roll call. We've been working a lot on flexibility, as I mentioned earlier, and I think that you'll find you're currently you have a broad spectrum of choices you can make. At least in the Senate chamber, I know, and I believe you're working hard in the House, and they've done real well in the committees. And so whatever the chambers decide, I believe at this point, you'll have a flexibility to go anywhere from almost nothing to a full all on. The other comment I should make on one of Tucker's points is for those of you who know, this will make sense, and for those of you who don't, you'll may be amazed. We actually record the Senate chambers sessions. And so Tucker's last point was well taken. We've been called. And so whether or not it's on video or whether it's the spoken word, when there were things like Vermont Yankee suits and various other issues, we have been requested to have the Senate debate provided. It's not cataloged. It comes as a full CD. We don't make a decision as to what part you get. You ask for a day, you get the day.
Right.
So there is some precedent for that already being occurred and having lawyers use it. How the House would want to deal with it is for their rules committee to decide. Retention, I think you have a broad spectrum of choices. I think all of them are probably permissible legally, whether that's from just broadcasting and letting it go out to keeping it forever. But there needs to be a decision. But I don't think you're restricted on what you choose on that. I do believe that you'll find that this coming term, the best tool for us to be using is probably still the Zoom and the YouTube. That's a Kevin thing, but I think you should probably consider in the longer run a different tool. From staffing perspective, you've heard this last year and a half has been challenging, busy for anybody in the building that's working on it. We have an ability, at least in the Senate Secretary's office, to accommodate most anything that the Senate decides to do, but it will take some retraining on redoing it. And I assume it's the same for the House or for some of the other people. So in that sense, it's a tool we're used to, but the sooner we're given some direction would be good. I think you're better off talking to Tucker or Michael Grady on what's required of the rules. I mean, my understanding is it's the spoken word. And so what is and what is not kept, that's why I don't think you have to keep the actual videos. But that is not my area of expertise. I guess that's it as far as sort of my major comments. I mean, I'd be more than willing to answer questions.
Great, thank you. Anyone have a question? Secretary, go ahead, Senator Clarkson.
Yeah, it's interesting, Sean. I hadn't focused on the fact that all our votes, when you're recorded, and actually now, because if you go back and listen closely you'd have to listen closely because there's no audio, there's no visual to support it. But once there's a visual supporting, so much for hiding behind a voice vote. I mean, there's no such thing. It'll be pretty clear who votes for what. And that's not a bad thing because we should all stand by our votes. I don't mean that, but I know that there are many times that we choose to do voice votes over roll calls for political reasons that we would prefer to have a voice vote.
It also happens in committee.
Yes, it does.
So the committee, every chair is different. But what does it mean when you say, anybody object, we're gonna make these changes? Is that a yes or a no? And how are you going to, it is going to make some of those tough decisions tougher. And it will allow more people, if they want to be postured. And so I think some of your committee processes, you'll get through it, will be just different and more difficult than what you're used to. I sat on appropriations and marking up a budget. It is a lot different historically than I watched online.
Right.
And whether or not that means it's more transparent or less transparent is for you to all figure out. But I'm not sure it's all more transparent.
Right. So may I just follow up? Because one other question I have for you is, I actually think that our decision to live stream or not, to record, all these decisions we're making in this section of our recommendations have impact on the uniformity with which both the House and the Senate choose to have committee work recorded or not. So for the first time, several committees actually this year, and since the pandemic started, have been recorded and publicly accessible, because not every committee in this building had a recording device. So I think this will also call the question on the uniformity of those practices, because I think it will not anymore be up to a committee chair. I think that will need to be a chamber and or a joint rules decision.
I agree, but there is the exception that the chamber could still decide to leave it in the chair's discretion. I share your sentiment. I don't think it's going to happen, but I think it could.
I think it does call the question on the uniformity of it, though.
Yeah. No. I think for the consistency will be important.
Yeah.
In all the different types of committees, but we can talk about what those guidelines look like. Do you have any other thoughts before we?
No, I feel so lucky to only be question one.
I'll leave space then for anyone else to jump in. No, okay. Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Bring up our House Clerk. That's Pam Rath. Good morning.
Good morning. For the record, that's the NRS clerk of the House. A lot of ground has already been covered, so I won't repeat a lot of what has already been said. But just to reiterate, I do think each chamber has to establish its own policies. This committee would be the one to establish whatever policies apply to joint committees. But I do believe it was a recommendation in the Legislative Advisory Committee report that there are universal policies throughout the ledge. So I think this is a good opportunity for members of both chambers to consider these issues and then take them back to their own chambers to discuss further. I thought that Tucker raised a great point about the journal requirement. So just the reference to the journal is in the Vermont Constitution. It's Chapter 2, Section 9. That says the votes and proceedings of the General Assembly shall be printed when 1/3 of members of each chamber think it's necessary at the end of the session, with the yeas and nays of the House on any question when required by 5 members. So that's how we get the 1 person requesting and 4 sustaining. And when required by 1 senator in the Senate, in which case every member of either chamber shall have the right to insert the reasons of the member's vote upon the minutes. So that really is referring to our permanent journal requirements. Our journal clerk, Rebecca, prepares the final journal at the end of the year. And that is what this is discussing, but these live stream recordings do raise the issue of another version of the General Assembly's proceedings being published somewhere. I think the concerns could be overcome by your discussions in your rules committees and perhaps the adoption of rules. If your chamber rules were adopted to say that there shall be live stream recordings. Or you could potentially have a policy about how the votes are recorded. I think one of the witnesses mentioned perhaps a different camera angle if you wanted to pursue that. I know when we were running Zoom during the session, when it came to voice vote, I turned it on the gallery view to have as many speakers on, or as many members on as possible. So it wasn't just highlighting one member whose voice happened to be the loudest in voting, to single out that member voting. But perhaps a rule amendment could be a way for the chamber to agree on the live stream recordings of votes and potentially also how long they're maintained. And that rule could determine also maybe what constitutes the official record of proceedings, such as is it just going to be the task cam and committees as the official record that a person could request, or would it be the live stream recording of the committee? I think most of the other things have already been captured, Madam Speaker, but is there anything else that you would like me to address or anybody else?
Any questions? Go ahead, Senator Ballant.
When you think about all the issues that we are juggling with, what do you see as the most critical issues for us to be dealing with before January? I know it's a big question. I feel like I have a good sense of that from the Senate Secretary, but I'd love to get your take on that as well. What do we need to deal with?
I think probably giving some direction to legislative IT, making the decisions on what sort of IT setup will be required, especially for the House chamber, because I think the House chamber is just more difficult to deal with technologically. Yeah. Getting the policy decisions about is the chamber going to agree to have the live streaming recorded, and just to make it a final policy decision. We've been dealing with our Zoom life, just because that's what we've been having to do. But once we get back in person, it would be a culture change to go from our now just audio recordings that are not kept online to just the full-time video recordings. Questions such as, should the recordings just be kept up for a biennium by biennium, with it not being the official record? I think it's the balance. It's discussing the policy with the balance of the transparency that everybody is seeking, but just getting everybody on board with what any cons of that transparency might be.
Just
Yes, go ahead.
so that there's official record, there's a recording, and then there's the potential decision that we may make to store an official recording. And I see them as three different things. And I just want to make sure I understand, and maybe Kevin he can nod about this one to say whether it's true or not, but it seems to me like it would behoove us to make sure that we have our own archive, so that if there is any manipulation going on, we would have that to refer to. And the official written journal would reflect that recording, but would dominate actually the official. Is that correct? The official written journal?
The official written journal that we have now, the large hardbound volume, that is the official record of each chamber's actions and procedure, and it doesn't pick up any of the comments made during floor debate. The House adopted a rule explicitly stating that debate is not recorded in the journal. It's always been the custom. Actually, there's a statute that describes the journal that says that debate is not to be recorded in the journal. So there are things that, while the journal is the official record, It doesn't capture the debate, which might contain some of the legislative intent about how the legislature reaches decision on certain bills. Legislative intent is important if law is challenged in court and the judicial branch is trying to interpret what is legislative intent. The Senate has their audio recordings, which kind of could help provide legislative intent, while the House has not historically had those same recordings. So I do think the floor recordings could help provide a greater window into what is legislative intent, when your journal, for example, could just be a voice vote, so that there were no official explanations of votes that are roll call votes.
Okay.
File.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, Secretary Bloomer, you do have an audio of the Senate chamber?
Yes, yeah, back in about 96, 97.
Don, could you come back? Is that okay?
Because no one else been able to hear you.
Yeah.
This, just trying to pause to give you an abbreviated version, but not so short that it takes out all the details. So back in the late 90s, the decision was made to do audio, and it had to do really with the committees. So there was a big debate in the Rules Committee whether they would require committees to be recorded. And there was one senator from Essex Orleans who convinced the Rules Committee that the better intent would be the floor versus the committee. And so the Senate back then decided to record the Senate floor sessions, and the committee chairs were still given discretion as to whether when theirs were turned off and on. So we have CDs, and we go back and we do them by the day, and we've been doing them ever since. That's why there are microphones in the Senate. Those are not audio, those are not amplifications, those are recording. It's also one of the reasons you can't have cell phones in the Senate, because it gets feedback.
Well, we have 150 microphones, probably only half of them work. So, so my point to Betsy Ann is, we have VPR that actually, live streams this for the public. Is there a way to, and maybe this isn't for you, but is there a way to capture that and have that the records?
There is.
That's what we did originally. I mean, so yes, I'm assuming it can be done. The reason is because we originally recorded, and the abbreviated version there, VPR tapped in before they had permission to broadcast from our recordings. So that's when the host started broadcasting, was VPR wanted to broadcast your sessions also, and they were, I think, approved probably by the Rules Committee, but they never went so far as doing recordings of it.
Okay. So is that maybe possibly a possibility?
So I've been talking with Kevin about getting us a menu of options and what's available. And no matter what, we have to address the microphone issue.
Right, yes,
So
yes.
He's done some good work on it.
But the other issue for at least the House during the last year and a half is the senators all fit on the one Hollywood Square, one screen. The House never did.
Right.
You had 25 people, 30 people max on the screen. So when there was a voice vote, it just happened to be those 30 people at that particular instance that happened to be on screen, and the other 120 were not.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as far as the fairness of who's voting yes and no, the House never really had that.
We have 30 members of the House?
Excuse me, 30 members of. But, and so it really wasn't a fair,
Right.
if you're talking fairness of seeing everyone, we never really had that for the last year and a half.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
And to add to your point, Patty, if we're wearing masks, it will still be masked, the voice vote.
it's true.
Unless it's the division, like Secretary Bloomer.
Right. Representative Clark?
So to put a finer point on it, I wanted to ask our clerk something that Secretary Bloomer really touched on briefly about the virtue of division and voice votes and the culture. And I'm wondering if describing it as a tension between compromise and collegiality and sort of polarization and performance, the idea of, us sort of being media ready as legislators, as opposed to deliberating and having debate, that there's this tension. And I wondered for our clerk, if our decisions around where to put cameras and how many to have and how to, which channels to put these recordings on, if we're at a point now where the institution of the House and how much the debate is actually the work being done in a committee or out on the floor, is the work being done, or is everything pre-baked and everybody's coming with their stake already in the sand? Because that's what I see, but I'd love for, as the keeper of our sort of institutional process, am I understanding that question before us on all of these, right?
I do think it could have a substantive change. I think it's something that you should think about. Are members going to speak less because they're going to be potentially embarrassed by saying something? Are members going to speak more and to potentially in a different way because they want to be recorded in a certain manner? I think it's a cultural issue. It is going to change the way that you have proceeded in your sessions and your committees, potentially, because of this new pressure.
Yeah.
And how those recordings can be used.
I think it's going to be really hard for people to understand that there's a virtue to not having absolutely everything that a legislator might want to say or converse with be there for all time, shareable, manipulable. I think that's going to be really hard for a lot of people outside of the institution to understand. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a touch.
Any other questions for our House Clerk or Senate Secretary? Okay, great, thank you. So I will say, I think and I'll open it up for a brief discussion. I think our next steps here are to solicit feedback with the list of general questions that we have to chairs and staff. I know this will be a conversation that also needs to happen at JLMC, but we can solicit feedback and then come back together with some, maybe some draft policy language with different choices for us to start working through. Does that sound good? Is there anything else that you'd like to add to that, Senator Clark?
So I think that's an interesting idea to both survey staff and members, or anybody in the building. I mean, really, the sort of building regulars, all staff, all members as a beginning. But I think we should hone the questions. So, I mean, I think we have to figure out who's going to do that work of honing the questions, because Tucker, Mike, everybody posed some fabulous questions. So I think we need to kind of distill those.
Yep.
And ask maybe 4 or 5 or 6 questions. And if yes, here, it goes to a bunch of other sub questions.
Yes.
It's a lot of nuance in this conversation.
Yeah.
As we have just discussed, and big long-term impact on the legislature.
Yep. Senator Ballant.
But also, I just want to remind us all that we have bodies that continue to come back. We have Senate rules, we have House rules, we have joint rules. Decisions that we make are not written in stone because we are trying to fly this thing while we're building it. And so I just want us all to understand, we may go down a road and we may say, this actually is not good for the institution. It's not good for the public. And so we do have a lot of pressure on us, but there's a lot that we are going to have to reevaluate with each decision that we make. And I know it's exhausting, but that's what you've all been doing as well, the IT and the Senate Secretary and the Clerk. So just wanted to make sure we're well aware of that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I also think that we have been holding these hybrid in-person meetings over the summer and the fall to pick up some lessons on what is working and what's not working. And so I think it's important to get that feedback as well, because we have more information than we did a couple months ago being back here. Representative Wong.
I was just going to say something similar, and that is that I agree with everything Senator Ballant said and Speaker Kowinski, and would add that we already have been doing all of this.
Yeah.
I mean, we already have the experience. In fact, our legislators have all been in this position. So we have something to base our thoughts and decisions on.
Yeah. All right. So if you have other thoughts on this, as you think about it more, please email me or the House Clerk or Connor. And we'll get a draft out to you for your feedback on the survey before we send it out. I think we've been taking notes and the clerk's been taking notes, so we can put that together for you. So our other mission this morning is to start making some decisions on space decision points. So there's multiple things that happen in this building from, before the pandemic that we used to have, and we need to start revisiting how do we come back in the safest way possible. And so we have a temporary plan that we need to put into place while we think about the long-term plan and how we expand the building or change the building in one way or another. So I thought that we could start, we'll go down. You should have with you a grid. If you don't, we can get one to you. You have a large or a small version to follow. Wanted to start flagging the ones that after working with the Sergeant at Arms seemed that makes sense just to make a call about now so they can plan. We can come back to it if something changes, but we thought this might be the easiest place for us to start the discussion today. So why don't we start on the chart with number 6. So we've touched on this in the previous meetings and conversations, but it's where do we hold party caucuses? Because we have talked about using our meeting rooms for committee rooms. And in the past, we have used the House chamber for various hearings or meetings. And so this is a conversation here about what do we do with the caucuses, especially, our House Democratic Caucus 92, the space is limited. The Republican caucus is in the 40s. We have to have space available for party caucuses to meet in the building. I think our intent would be that any other sort of issue caucuses or meetings could happen in the space at 109, where we have several meeting rooms available. So you have this in front of you. Our vote, we will have to have subsequent conversations with our own House and Senate Rules Committees, but this would be to direct the Sergeant at Arms to follow through on those space decisions. Are there any concerns or questions on this one?
That's which rooms you're thinking of using, right? Or,
Yes.
I mean, obviously, the only place that the House Democrats are going to be able to house themselves is the chamber floor, the House chamber floor.
Yep. So
We've historically we have been meeting simultaneously, both well, sometimes the progressives will choose a different day, but historically 3 at the same time.
that's right.
Tuesday, so now what?
So on the House side of things, my recommendation would be to allow the House floor for party caucuses to meet. We could discuss whether we want to change the time so that we have minimal people as possible in the cafeteria. So like we're trading. Another option that we could talk about is using one of these rooms that will be a committee room. We don't know who will be in what room, but we could arrange it such that we're in caucus anyway, and that committee's not meeting, and the space would be available to have not only a committee meeting, but a caucus, a smaller caucus. I would like to try to keep just at the bare minimum party caucuses in the building if possible. Yes, Senator Clark.
So as a member of this committee that's making this recommendation, this was our intent, was to try and keep caucuses meeting in the building, and for both chambers to be flexible about, so it's possible if you needed to meet at the same time to use hopefully the Senate chamber, it's possible. The Senate chamber is something that, we can discuss, but that there is enough room still in the building for us to work creatively together to prioritize party caucuses meeting here. Both scheduled caucus meetings and pop-up caucuses, which is another subject when we're on the floor and we need a pop-up caucus. Right, you tend to do more than we do. The House tends to do more than the Senate.
Yeah. So That's right. If we're on the floor, the only committee that may still be meeting on the House side is House Appropriations, but we would still have other rooms where committees would be on the floor.
Exactly.
We could do that, yes.
And some are still set up with, vaguely similar setup like room 10.
Right. I'm seeing consensus around this. For these are more informal, but we want to have a temperature check on these. Is there anyone who opposes this game plan right now? Good, okay.
I just really want to reiterate that these caucuses remain in the House, in this State House building. I mean, I'm just thinking of, a few, like Representative Helm. It's just. would be
Yeah,
physically
the mobility
impossible.
challenges.
Mobility issues, so, yeah.
All right, so this next one, we are moving to question eight, which is priority space scheduling for legislative meetings. So our vote and decision here is to continue to give the Sergeant at Arms the jurisdiction on space scheduling. So you'll remember when we were back in the building, legislative committees or meetings would take precedent over other meetings regarding space issues. You read here, standing committees, joint committee meetings, and public hearings should have priority of use of legislative spaces throughout the standard session. This is a little, the difference in this too is that now we are expanding this jurisdiction to 109 and 133. Is there any discussion or questions about that one? Go ahead.
Madam Speaker, before you do that, can you just, for people who may be watching, can you explain where 109 and 133? Could you just?
Sure. So 109 is also known as the Pavilion. We have many offices located there, from the Attorney General and the Governor's office. This would be meeting space on the second floor. 133 State Street is on the other side of the State House where the tax department is. And there's meeting rooms in the basement that are available to us. Thank you for use. Yep. I'll just keep this. All those, I'm sorry, Allison, did you have another question?
I think it's very important here because it's going to be complex in our complex. And so one of our recommendations here really is to use the Sergeant at Arms as a funnel for all the scheduling. That's just critically important because they are the captain of this now expanded ship.
Yep. All right. Go ahead.
And is the Sergeant of Arms comfortable with that expanded role?
Yes.
She was.
So the Sergeant at Arms was unavailable today, but she has sent us a designee to give the thumbs up there. So thank you, Chief. All right, so all those, to keep it standard and easy, I'll just go with a voice. So all those in favor of the recommendation for number 8, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great, thank you. Carries. Next, number 9. Yeah, I didn't do a voice. I just kind of looked around the table. I don't know. Yeah, I thought I'd be maybe a little bit more formal on these. So number 9, pausing use of the card room by advocates and special interest. So again, this is a space scheduling jurisdiction for us. In the past, we've had the card room available every day for another group to participate. The concern here is the concern that we have with everything, that the cafeteria gets congested. There are lines. We want to make sure we're doing everything we can to avoid getting crowds together because the air quality is so poor. So this would be just postponing, hitting pause for the 22 legislative session. Thoughts, concerns?
Okay, and the other tag on that is that with all our normally available spaces for meeting together taken up with committee rooms, that this is just another place you can meet informally. That it just, instead of having it used by somebody else, this is another place that legislators, it's another resource space for legislators.
Yep. And advocates, school groups, they will all, have access to 109 or 133. So if they wanted to have a legislative day where they had a group in, or had some sort of presentation, we do have space available, just in a more safe spot.
Yeah, this is, I mean, that is just like the crossroads of everything.
Right.
So it just is.
Yes.
And when you have somebody in the card room, it just is like walking a minefield, trying to get through to wherever you want to go. So,
Yep. Thoughts or discussion on that? All right. All those in favor of hitting pause on the use of the card room for the 22 session, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. All right, the ayes have it, and we will pause use of the card room. Next up, we move to number 10, which is limiting the use of the cafeteria for sidebars and receptions. So currently, it says here that, let me see. Oh, this is a good place for your other supplemental document to highlight here. From the Sergeant at Arms, so a number 10, haven't read this already. There have been a few reservations made in the cafeteria for the 22 session. Like all of this, the Sergeant at Arms and all the offices have been telling organizations that this is temporary, and that could change. As of right now, the recommendation would be to limit those, and I will open it up for your thoughts. So this would be once in the morning and once in the afternoon. In the cafeteria, just to remind everyone, the sidebar would be that hallway that runs through the cafeteria.
have we ever had more than one in the morning and one in the afternoon? Yes. We have.
Yes, it's not consistent,
Not
but we have.
very often.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Okay. Does this sound like a good compromise, given what we're also doing with the card room? Yep. Okay. All right. Any other thoughts before we take a vote? All right. All those in favor of limiting the cafeteria sidebar to one group in the morning and the afternoon, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. And we have moved on to number 11. Wait, this is the Cedar Creek room. So this is pausing the use of the Cedar Creek room for presentations, large press conferences, and receptions. As you know, the air quality in the Cedar Creek room is very bad. And this is just one that is not a good meeting space for people. And we've had issues in the past with congestion in that room. Janice, the Sergeant at Arms has said that we have not scheduled any events or activities in the Cedar Creek room at this time. Thoughts or feedback on this one? So this is pausing the use of the Cedar Creek room for presentations, large press conferences, and receptions.
Right here.
So the question I have is what constitutes a large press conference? I know
Right.
there was some discussion of that, and it looks like 12 and 13 on this list is going to addressing that. So I don't get too far in the weeds, but it sounds like looking ahead, there are some other spaces that will be available for large press conferences.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead. It was one of our thorny, long discussions in our committee. And I think in part, we will leave it to the discretion of the Sergeant at Arms, who has a pretty good sense of that room and what is possible. But we also wanted to make it available for a particular legislative press conferences, not big groups from outside. Those are easy to schedule elsewhere. But for a legislative press conference on a bill or on something that comes up last minute that we want to have, let's say the speaker and the pro tem want to give a very quick press conference on something, that is available for us to use. So it's trying to shepherd the big purpose press conferences with lots and lots of advocates who are in the building to a specific place that isn't the Cedar Creek room.
Yep. Any other questions?
A question. I
Yes,
just wonder if legislative-led press conferences could wind up being large press conferences. I can certainly think of a couple of instances where
where that has happened. Now, I guess we can defer to the judgment of the sergeant at arms as a practical matter, but
I think that's exactly right. I think that's our hope and that the people who are organizing those will be honest with the sergeant at arms office. I mean, because they'll be legislators. It would have to be a legislator. So, yeah, I think that you're right. And I think the sergeant at arms and Matt can speak to it more specifically, have a very good sense of when things are going to be large or small.
I think
Oh, there she
what
is.
I would recommend here is that we take an action on 11 so that we can make sure that the sergeant at arms has that authority, and then we can regroup just to talk more a little bit about the dynamics of large and small. I also think it's great to have a neutral party be making these decisions, but there are a lot of other questions that come with that. So we could take just the higher 10,000-foot level of doing the pause in the Cedar Creek room for these types of events, and then with the support of the sergeant at arms, just think through more about the large versus small aspect of it.
Given the air quality, I think that's what we should do.
Yeah.
At this point. Yep.
Okay. Any other thoughts or questions? All right. All those in favor of pausing use of the Cedar Creek room for presentations, large conferences, and receptions, please say aye.
Hi.
Opposed, say nay. The ayes have it, and we will move forward with number 11. Now let's move to number 20. All right, so this is converting all legislator use rooms to House committee rooms. So we are talking about opening up rooms 9, 10, 11, the legislative lounge, and the Ethan Allen room to move from the traditional meeting rooms to House committee rooms. As you may know or not know, because of before the pandemics of air quality issues with the House Natural Resources Committee room in the 40s, they have been meeting in the Ethan Allen room for legislative session. So that's already been practiced here in the building. Go ahead, Senator.
That hold true for a lot of the Senate rooms. We haven't addressed. I know the institutions room has had terrible air quality, and anyone that served there. So we are taking a lot of space of the State House for committee rooms. I just wondered, are all the rooms that you're thinking of moving, or we're thinking of moving for air quality? Is that the issue?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So how are we addressing the Senate air quality rooms?
I think
I know, like you said, I'm not taking sides. I know there's serious air quality issues on the Senate side. Because by the afternoon in institutions, just about able to breathe. So how are we addressing that?
I think we should, if you want to,
our sergeant at arms is best prepared for that conversation.
Thank you and welcome.
thank you, Janet Miller, Sergeant at Arms. Senator Miles, I think that, and I don't have the stuff in front of me right now, but some of the Senate rooms have the ability to override the system somewhat. And Matt, I don't know, if you have it on the top of your head for Senate institutions.
Can't override, I know that one. That's impossible. We've tried everything in that room and nothing works. But
I think
I'm just using that one. There may be others, but I'm just using that one.
And I think it comes back to the same issues when the oxygen level is lower in that room. People might feel that to a certain extent and be tired, and then sometimes it gets too cold in there when we dump more air into the room to make it more oxygen, then it gets too cold. Matthew, did you have pardon me?
13.
For institutions, Senate institutions can hold 13 right now. I think that, and I wish Bill, if you want to have a discussion more in depth about it, the people from Buildings and General Services can talk to you about the HVAC system itself. But in certain rooms, like in the House, those rooms cannot be, they call an override, cannot give you any more than what they already do. The Senate's a little bit, the Senate rooms, we're more able to do that. I think that's my recollection.
Senator Ballant?
So just to be completely transparent, since this recommendation was made, I know there's been a lot of conversations within the Senate about my willingness to move out of the pro tem's office, to have Senate Ag move into the pro tem's office. And I know, although I was willing to do that, I know there are a number of my colleagues who feel like for us in the Senate to go downsize for the pro tem's office is not going to meet the needs of the Senate as a whole.
Right.
And so I just want to make sure we're clear about that. And there was a senator from the advisory committee that reached out to me this morning to say, although we may approve the use of all of these rooms for Senate committees, there is some concern, for House committees, there is some concern that one of these spaces may need to be used by a Senate committee. So I just want to put that, I'm okay moving forward saying we need to use these rooms for legislative spaces. I'm not okay with saying what should be in those spaces at this meeting, given what I'm hearing from my colleagues. So.
Yes, Senator Massa.
All the years we've had discussion in institutions about Bobby Starr or the Agriculture Committee, it was always our thought that it would be just one move to the cloakroom, and that would cut the cloakroom, because I think the mailboxes you want to do away with. I'm told one of these.
Right.
So that was the only switch that we had heard of. Then when I heard about the pro tem being put in that room, that was, to me, it's just not a good trade. I mean, so I have been very concerned about that. The pro tem should stay exactly where she is now, or whoever's pro tem. And Bobby Starr was the only one that we were trying to address concern for, or the Agriculture Committee. And we thought that was on the agenda for the cloakroom, but evidently every other space is taken now. So that's a real concern to me and many other senators. So I don't know how we're going to address that.
So I think one thing is clear is that we all agree that these rooms need to be converted for use of committees.
For temporary.
For temporary.
I think it's very important to remind us.
I think if there is consensus around the table for that, I think we postpone this vote and talk more about it, because we all agree on that intent. So why don't we just, does anyone not agree on that? Okay. So I'm seeing consensus that it's for legislative space, for legislative committee space.
I'm fine with that. I just have a question about Senator Starr's room.
Yeah, go ahead.
My understanding, and I don't know if Alice and Senator Clarkson, you were on the committee, the legislative advisory committee for this. Was there ever any talk about the senators? I mean, I know they only meet, they have two committees in which they serve on. Was there talk of having one of their rooms shared?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there are all sorts of things that we could discuss.
Okay.
And yes, some of us were very interested in looking at the sharing option, because we have a luxury
empty.
for one year, we could, consider sharing our committee rooms, which would not be that burdensome.
Okay, thank you. So, but as an addendum, I just want to be clear that we heard strongly from Ledge Operations that they were not comfortable. That they were not comfortable with the Senate sharing rooms, because it was felt like the committee assistants needed the space to do their work. So I just want to make sure there was multiple layers, and I've heard that in our weekly meetings with Ledge Operations, that there's another layer there.
Right.
So if the Senate Ag Committee is empty, and I'm just saying, like, education is on this hallway, Ag is on this hallway, perhaps the legislative can use that empty room. One person in that room would.
Right, I'm saying that that was
Okay.
discussed, and it's certainly something that I brought up as well. We've heard from legislative operations that would not be their preference, so we don't need to debate that now. I just want to
Okay.
make sure they're,
But it's in that you're speaking about.
yes, okay, good, thank you.
Okay. Go ahead.
Was a discussion about the cloakroom being made into a committee room and then taking half of that space, or is that in the mix at all?
We discussed turning the cloakroom into a committee room, and it is from an HVAC point of view, almost kind of the model size. And as we look at some of the designs for the future, it's sort of it's a roughly the right size that people want for airflow, because it's 600, just over 600 square feet. And, but we did not talk about specific committees using anything except.
Splitting it, I just thought about splitting it. That was.
No, we did not discuss splitting it.
Discussed that for a lot of times, and to do, split the room. If we're gonna do away with the mailbox.
Right.
Just need a cloakroom. If you split it in two, it makes a nice committee room.
It does, but it doesn't anymore with our new understanding of airflow and air quality. It doesn't any longer. That split would not necessarily satisfy those.
But that's under the present airflow, right?
No, future, well, I can't answer that. Sergeant at Arms could answer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what the airflow will be in room 9. Now it holds 22 people, I think.
With
in room 9. And I don't know, we haven't planned on putting a wall up in there, or that isn't
That's
the discussion now.
Discussion I had heard because.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we didn't discuss separating it.
Oh, I'm surprised it wasn't discussed because it was something that's been around here for a long time.
Well, the discussion was in tandem with airflow and air quality. And so our understanding of the committee was that we needed the space of that room to have the air quality we would need for a committee room.
And I think the committee also
Is that fair?
is working on the fact that our understanding was that the pro tem had offered
Right.
space.
And that
I
offers,
think we were.
I hope
that
that's on the
premise.
table.
it's not off, I don't believe it's off the table.
So I don't want to get down, this is going a little
Okay.
farther
Well,
off than
sideways.
here. So why don't I think it is clear for staff, for the Sergeant at Arms to know that the intent of this committee is that these rooms will be used for legislative committees, and we will continue to do some work and gather more information to come back with what committees and all of that good stuff.
Right.
All right. So I'm just looking at the clock here. So if you will indulge me in moving on to number 22, which is again, our jurisdiction and moving to legislative operations staff to Aiken is use of the space. So we are expanding our footprint and having staff be able to move and expand out. So this would be approving the use of the space for staff. Any questions or thoughts, or does the Sergeant at Arms have anything to want to add to this? We got this space in order to expand, to make it more safe for everyone. So
Yeah, we're still waiting. These rooms could be used, but we're still waiting to improve them slightly. Yep, and we're waiting on to get some RFPs back. Get the work started.
Yep, great. Any questions or thoughts on this one? This one's pretty straightforward. Great. All those in favor of approving the use of 2 Aiken for moving to staff over there? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. And we have approved the use of that space. Thank you. Let's now go to 25, which is also along the same line. Approving the use of the space to move our HR staff there. That's human resources staff to the first floor of 2 Aiken. Any questions or feedback on that request? No? Great. All those in favor of moving HR staff to 2 Aiken, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. You guys have it, and we made that approval. So that wraps up the votes and direction that we needed. I think we do have some discussion on a couple others. I'm just going to take a moment to see if there's something that's more pressing than others, or if the Sergeant at Arms has any like to flag for us to start talking about.
It is 24. I mean, you need a green light, don't you, on stuff to start moving on construction?
No, I don't think so, not from us. We've been given
No, not from
it's
us.
within, yeah. So just looking at 24, so this is converting the legislative operations space into a coat room. That work has begun. We're starting to get more information. You'll also see above that, number 23, moving to legislative operations staff into a different state house location. So this is the recommendation and the path moving forward on this after lots of feedback and discussion would be just to move the 2 operations staff to the conference room that's across from where Mike and Peggy sit now, and expand the conference room and make that their office space.
Okay. We do need to discuss then the all gender bathroom that we were hoping might be in that space.
No, I think that's all set as well.
Oh, and where are we thinking of putting that?
So that's going to go into where the infirmary is now.
Okay.
That's where the best sewage line is. And
Okay.
the easiest way to get there.
Well, okay. I'm not sure that's any easier than the 3rd floor. Okay, great.
All right, so work that is still being done that we will continue to get updates on, just because there are moving pieces, is around basically the space where we're thinking about the coat room and office space for staff. So that is work that's being done that we'll continue to get updates on. And we'll continue the discussion or just around larger spaces for committee rooms. Is there anything that is not on this list that you would like us to have on a future agenda item?
I think the video conferencing issue
That feels like the main.
is critically important because it has impact on our committee work, on our chamber work.
Yep.
On our everything work.
Yep. And there was a couple of items that came up at our last meeting that I definitely have on our radar for our next meeting. I'll collect those notes and regroup with members. I know there was a couple there. But I just wanted to create space since in the past couple of weeks, if there's anything that's come up in your conversations with members or the public that you think joint rules should have a little discussion about. Okay. All right. So what we'll do, like I said, with next steps, we will get a survey questionnaire out to chairs and staff. Be on the lookout for that draft to get your feedback on before we send it out.
Sorry, chairs or all members?
Chairs, we do chairs, all members and staff. I think that the chairs, I think there's something special to get from the chairs who've been navigating the recordings that we can learn from. So maybe I guess
There's clerks. I mean, because clerks, and quite honestly, the committee assistants, even though many of them are not working right now, the committee assistants they really need to be way in on that too.
Okay.
Because they are the ones doing it, and I think they need to,
All right, well, let me think about if there's a way that we can create one that meets the needs of all, or if we need to do maybe a one-off more
Right.
specialized. So let me think about that. We can work on that. And then be on the lookout for a doodle to set up our next meeting in about 2 weeks to really, again, I think our focus just needs to be right now on supporting the Sergeant at Arms with the decisions we need to make about the space and about these policies around streaming and recording. So that'll be our focus.
could we actually choose a date? Because this was really, today was hard. I had to cancel 3 things to make this work.
I
So,
don't think we can do it on the fly while live.
but right, so if we could go off live streaming, but if we could do a doodle poll sooner rather than later,
We can do that.
Make that decision maybe early next week.
I will coordinate with the pro tem's office to get dates that work for us, and then we'll send it out to all of you.
Yeah.
Sound good?
That is good.
All right. Thank you, everyone. This was a very productive meeting, and we will be in touch. Have a great afternoon. Nice
You're
job with